Did you know that? That there is an urge of all of life, all of possibility, all of the good in you. In fact, the Fillmores talked about it a lot, and it's very present in some of their really basic unity teachings. Principle number 1 reads, there is but one presence and one power, God the good. Principle number 2, our essence is of God. Therefore, we are inherently good. I tie that to that same language, or different language rather, that Wallace D. Wattles uses, original substance. They're saying the essence of God, same idea, different words. What a relief. There's goodness in me? Like, do you feel that? There I am as a baby, right? Nobody looks at a baby and goes, oh my goodness, that baby is going to grow up and it's going to cause so much harm. They were born broken. That doesn't happen because it's so easy to look at a baby and go, you are born with this original innocence. So are you. And so I think a lot about models, and exploring my own ideas is actually one of my favorite things to do. And so I've put together a basic model of communication. Here's me. I'm pretty cool sometimes. I've got an inner world, which consists of my thoughts, my feelings, my experiences, etc. And then I find myself, all of those things are invisible. You can't look at me and see the richness of my inner world. Those are mine alone. And then I have this material world that I find myself in, which have my environment, my relationships, the nourishment, the food that I eat, etc. And this is, of course, my visible world. These are the things that you can use your eyes with and see. You look up here, you look at the suit, you probably tell me that I look dapper, and I go, hey, thanks. And then there's you. I find you in this realm with me. And boy, how grateful am I. I'm so glad you're here. You're also pretty cool. Yeah, there's God stuff in you. You also have an inner world, a very rich, alive inner world that when I look at you, I can't see fully. Your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences, etc. And then I have this idea. I see this thing inside of me that I have, as Wallace D. Wattles would say, the urge to express. And so I take that idea, I translate it using the best that I can into words, and I throw that language at you. I'm doing it right now. You're taking that language, you're synthesizing that language, bringing it into your internal world, and building your own understanding of the idea based off of the language that I'm sharing with you. Is this making sense? You following me so far? Yeah. So we're using our words in effort to make our invisible world visible by somebody else. Now, of course, words aren't the only way we can do this. There's music, there's fashion, there's dance, there's an infinite number of ways we can express ourselves. But the purpose of today's conversation is in the language nuance, in the communication. So we're using our words to get our ideas understood. But oftentimes, I emphasize the word effort because it's not a guarantee. Just because I shared my ideas with you, just because I shared my words with you, doesn't guarantee that you are actually going to fundamentally understand the idea that lives behind the words. Making sense? And we're using language to do this. But then that leads us to the essential question of, well, who's defining the terms? Who's defining what the meanings of these words are? Is it me? Am I defining it? Is it you? Are you defining it? Is it my parents? Are they defining it? The world context that we find ourselves in, the dictionary, that plays a role. The news outlets, social media. Like, who is actually defining the terms of these words that we're trying to use to understand each other? Well, let's take the big bird view, huh? I look at this photo and I think friendship. There are some really lovely, lovely people in this photo, of which I love dearly. And if every time I said the word friendship, I punched you in the shoulder, generally speaking, friendship would start to mean what? Ouch. Ooh, that hurts. I don't want to get punched in the shoulder. So that meaning becomes very real to that person. So it's less of a who is defining the terms and more of a what is defining the terms. And I think it's pretty obvious. Our experiences are the very thing that defines what these words mean to us. Of course, there are challenges in that. Communication is messy. If you're actually in a situation where you don't understand each other and you're both earnestly trying to find each other, that's a messy process. Anybody experience that? Okay, cool. I'm not the only one. Awesome. All right. So we take that language and we throw it at each other, and it looks something like this. We try, and then it goes down and it falls, and like, well, that didn't quite work out the way that I meant it. And this is because everybody's experience is inherently, innately different. And if our experiences define our terms, well, then that's easy to come to the conclusion that our terms also inherently have different meanings. Yet, we're walking around in the world assuming that the words to me mean the same thing to you. So let's go into a real-life example of something that conveys this. Look at that briefcase. Hyenas, got a Walmart bag, baseball bat, clearly doing something important. I don't remember what. Probably going to spend time with my grandma. But throughout my life, I would say I grew up with faith. It wasn't the kind of faith that we tried to define. It wasn't the kind of faith that we even had a lot of conversation about. It was just a general, oh, life's got my back. Like, it'll work out. Just wait for it. It's coming. Right? Here's my mama and me hanging out. Me and my sister just hanging out. There was just sort of a general feeling of goodness has my back. And then I'd go out as I got older, and I'd start to learn about God. And I got to tell you, it was pretty confusing to me, at least my experience at that time. Because I'd go to these places, they'd tell me I was born broken, they'd tell me I'm an inherent sinner, they'd tell me that same-sex marriage shouldn't be a possibility. It felt like what they were saying was of a different place than that faith goodness that I've grown to understand throughout my experiences. And so I avoided church. Clearly not the case now. I spend about 20 hours here a week. But I avoided it like the plague. But I felt like I knew what I believed. Like I had ration behind my beliefs, even though I identified as, an atheist at that particular time in my life. And so what would happen is, in my best attempt to communicate, when people would say, hey, what do you believe in? And I'd go, oh, all right, well, at this point in my life, I'm an atheist. Well, they would come to I would understand this assumption, but they would immediately say, well, so you don't believe in anything? Of which I would feel completely perplexed because, well, I believed deeply. I believe in the power of compassion. I believe in the power of the transformation of love. I believe that what we do in the world matters. I believe in listening to one another and giving each other second chances. I could go on and on and on about all of the different nuances behind what I believe. But they were too busy grabbing on to what atheism at that particular point in my life meant to them in order for them to feel receptive to what it is I felt like I had to say. And so, generally speaking, at that point in my life, I felt pretty misunderstood. Has anybody ever felt misunderstood? Yeah, it's not a fun feeling, isn't it? In fact, if we jump back to last week, who was here last week? It was a wonderful sermon, wasn't it? Let's hear from Yvette. Last week, Yvette talked about the idea of being heard. And if I apply that idea to my model of communication, the best conclusion that I can arrive at is being heard is when you say something, and if you look, those light bulbs are different. It's they're both light bulbs, but, they're very different light bulbs. But it's when the idea that you're expressed is actually understood beneath the language. It creates a moment of connection, a moment of feeling understood, and that moment is very nourishing. Like, there are lots of times in my life where there are people who feel misunderstood for long periods of time. And then they finally find that one moment where somebody is willing to be humble enough to understand their point of view. And that one moment feels like a huge relief. Maybe you've experienced something like that. Because how often does this happen? We have the urge to express, the language comes out, and we just totally miss each other. In our current world, I'd say that happens quite a bit. Because language inherently has some limitations. On one hand, in the process of expressing, what if I don't have the perfect words? What if I don't say it right, so I don't give myself full permission to even try to say it? What's the point? I'm going to use the wrong words anyway, and then I'm just going to feel misunderstood, and that feels weird, so I'm just going to avoid expressing altogether. Then on the other hand, when I'm receiving somebody's words, sometimes I can't look past what the words mean to me to understand what they mean by them. Which sometimes has us attaching to labels and creating that us versus them mentality. See that anywhere? Getting a couple nods. I'm glad I'm not the only one. So then what about this second principle then? Our essence is of God, therefore we are inherently good. We're both good. You're good, I'm good. You're cool, I'm cool. And sometimes we lose sight of that, I think, in all of the complexity of trying to figure out what these languages mean. So what happens when we have the humility to let go of what words mean to me in order to open my heart's ability to curiously understand what you mean by them? What happens if I give myself permission to use the wrong words in pursuit of expressing my ideas with more clarity? From my perspective, based on my experience, what happens is more connection in my life. Connection with myself, connection with the people I find myself spending time with. This is Rudolf Steiner. He was also a philosopher in the early 1900s. That's true of kind of all of the people I'm quoting today. They were alive at the same time, which to me means, wow, what a powerful time in the world. And he would say, love is higher than opinion. If people love one another, the most varied opinions can be reconciled. Thus, one of the most important tasks for humankind today and in the future is that we should learn to live together and understand one another. If this human fellowship is not achieved, all talk of development is empty. All talk, not some talk, all of it. I just like cool emojis. So then let's bring it back to principle number 1, because this is all about talking amongst each other and connecting with each other as human beings. But there is but one presence and one power, God the good. So there is, according to this principle, a higher power at play. What about the connection with that higher power? I mean, in my life, that's been such a rich, meaningful, purposeful connection. And it's something that I feel like I would like more of. So then what comes first? Does the Word create that connection? The right word that I call this infiniteness? Do I call it the universe? Do I call it God? Do I call it infinite good? Sweet Spirit? But my point here is that if we're fighting over which words to use, I think we've already lost. The word itself is lifeless. It's in the speaking of the word and the receiving of the word where life exists. The idea behind the words are so much more important. And so I'm going to tell another story here. This is Fred Rogers. This is one of my biggest icons. Did you know he's an ordained minister? He was ordained in 1963. In fact, when he started Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood in 1968, one of the most iconic, moving childhood TV series of all time, he started it as an act of ministry. It was very intentional when he started that program that he was aiming to minister children and help them find meaning in the challenges of the modern world context. It was ministry to him. And he had a rich relationship with God. He would talk about it all the time. But he never mentions the word God, ever, in his efforts, in his show. Does that make his ministry any less impactful? I don't think so. Because he gave what I would refer to, he gave to these kids the God experience, the God idea. He helped millions of kids understand their own potential. He helped millions of kids see that they were inherently good and they had wonderful things to offer the world, and that the challenges that they saw in their current world environment were not the end of their experience. What a gift! And what a perfect example of somebody who clearly demonstrates the idea beneath the language. In fact, he didn't use the language at all. He was too busy demonstrating, too busy showing the way, because he knew how to make kids feel seen. Going back to that being heard, what an important part of the process. And so go back to Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. I have a couple of questions here. With principle 1, doing exactly what Fred Rogers would do then, how can we help people experience the goodness in life? To experience God instead of just talk about which is the right word we should be doing, which should be using. And how can we help them experience the God or good within them? To look in the mirror and see their own goodness. That's the two things that he was so good at, and what I think made his ministry so successful. And if I'm being very honest with you, one of the things I love about Unity South, We're not here to tell you to use the right language. We're not here to analyze your words and assess if you're saying the right thing. We're here to facilitate an experience that tells you you are of God, you and God are the same. Not to tell you, I suppose, but for you to innately experience it and have that own realization on your own. I just love him. I mean, have you ever watched the video of him speaking in front of Congress? He's defending why the government should fund his show. And it was a big debacle. Everybody was ready to cancel him, and he just sat. He had a prepared speech. He set the speech aside, and all he did was share some of the lyrics of some of the songs that he wrote for these children. Excuse me. And it moved the people well enough that they funded his show. I would encourage you to find that video and watch it. But one of the things Fred Rogers said was, imagine if we all walked into the world with the belief that each person was inherently worthy, I think is what that's supposed to say. Imagine if our goal was to help each other recognize that we are worthy of being loved. Imagine if we sought to listen more than we spoke. It's easy to start imagining sort of the nuances of how the world might change, how our culture might change, how we might interact with one another differently. So here's my encouragements. And again, this is just coming from a goofball on stage, so take it or leave it, huh? Be bold. Going back to Kelly, that was 2 weeks ago. She talked all about boldness. It was a really wonderful service. Say the wrong words in pursuit of expressing your ideas. There has to be a permission to try. Secondly, be humble. Don't take words at face value. Curiously discover the ideas beneath them. And tune in to the good in the people that you disagree with. It's easy to see good in the people you agree with, isn't it? It's hard to look at somebody who's saying something that goes totally against everything you believe and go, wow, man, there's still goodness in there. I don't need to agree with you, but I understand what you're saying, and I see the good in you. There they are again. Jeez. Creates connection. And it's just this one moment of connection that can genuinely change the trajectory of that other person's life forever. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. If someone is starved of connection and they get that one moment of connection, it's sincerely, I've experienced it, it can sincerely change the trajectory of their life forever. So, when I'm willing to look beyond language, I feel more connection in my life. I feel more connection with my life to myself. I feel more connection with the people around me. And I feel more connection with God. And that's the truth as I see it. Appreciate you taking the time to listen, and I would encourage you to apply some of these ideas if you are so willing. Let's welcome up the band.